to this side here.
Hi, my name is Melissa Butler. I've been teaching for 15 years, mostly in elementary and mostly in Austin. I have a comment and then I have a suggestion because I hate people who gripe and don't offer any suggestions. I love the fact that Representative Aycock set up the blog. That's cool. And get people to, different sides to put their opinions. What happened to me last year, I'm a special ed teacher. I didn't mention that. And because of the testing, it used to be we tested special ed kids on where they were, and we would look at their progress from where they were. Well, now they walk in, third graders, 8 years old. What I did last year is I made them cry. And I'm a teacher, and I didn't get into this job to make kids cry. I didn't. And I'm squashing an 8-year-old's feeling about education and, oh, I can't read. You know what? Most people in Texas don't read above a 4th grade level. And by the time this kid gets out of high school, I'm hoping he can read at a 4th grade level. But it bothers me because I'm looking at elementary kids, and I know already they're going to drop out. So my suggestion is maybe that we can make a test that starts off, okay, this is what they know at the beginning of the year, and this is what they know at the end of the year. And then you can say to me that I did my job or I didn't. But I can't take a kid, and I'm not like, arguing with anybody. Then you can take to see if I did my job, and then you can say to me a kid that was reading Cat, and now he made a year's gain. But of course he's not going to pass a STAR test. Okay? That's because my main thing is the love of learning. And because he can't read, does it mean you can't love science, and you can't love building things, and you can't love plumbing? I can make more money being a plumber, actually, right now. So that's just all I have.
Just add $75,000 in 3 years for a master plumber. But no, very good point. And I think that's what Representative Aycock and others have been saying, is that try to measure where you were and then where you are at the end of the year. And that's a much more sensible approach.
Okay, let's take a question from this side.
Hello, my name's Amanda Austin. I'm part of Occupy AISD, and I have a master's in education from UT, and also I'm a certified teacher in special education and early childhood education. Earlier I heard a panelist say that this is not an issue of race, but that's a farce. Only when white middle-class children are affected does it not become about race. And because the children who are being affected the most are the children who are of color or poor, and we know this, and these are the children who are then having their schools shut down because they're not passing these tests, and then turned over to charter schools, which are then going to profit from them in some way or another. So those who push for the rigorous testing are typically those who are not affected. I see Drew Sherbely and Bill Hammond invited to the Texas legislation to speak about education, but they're experts in business, and as a teacher, I won't tell you that I'm an expert in business. If we want to encourage parent and community empowerment, why are we not inviting the parents and the community to be the speakers of the legislation? So I'm getting to my question in just a second. Earlier I heard, and this is more directed to Dr. Valenzuela and Dr. McNeil, earlier I heard you, Dr. Valenzuela, mention something about how this is being used with the front of a civil rights movement of our time and things, and I was wondering if you could speak more to that, about how that is affecting the actual children who are being affected by all of these things.
Well, I think that some of y'all have seen the press. Bill Hammond, came out with a piece where he made a statement where if we do away with the testing system, which no one is talking about, by the way, but he's, I think, trying to scare the public, then it will eliminate our capacity to understand where our poor minority children are performing in the state of Texas. And I just take umbrage to that. He's not representing the voice of the civil rights movement. LULAC, NAACP, our leadership that has been advocating for fair, valid, and research-based testing. This is not an agenda. This is not a narrow agenda. This is a research-based approach to assessment. Assessment is a much bigger construct than testing, right. Okay? We have to understand that. Assessment is massive. And the audiences tend to reduce testing to, or assessment to testing, and that takes us down a wrong conceptual path and policy path as well.
All right, so let's go over to the side. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Zachary Stone, and I am a Plan 2 Honors as well as a Government, Economics, and History student here at the University of Texas at Austin. And I had a question, I suppose, for Commissioner Pauken, as well as for the representative and for Mr. Williams. Because from a student's perspective, I spent my senior year watching teachers euphemistically be riffed. And I know that happened in other states where budget shenanigans led to education budgets being slashed, even though there was money in financial systems, particularly in California, where that happened from kindergarten to postdoctoral research. I suppose what I'm wondering is if at the same time as we advocate moving away from the state-controlled one-size-fits-the-state towards the local-controlled standardized test policy, would it be wise to move towards a one-size-fits-more, more stable, federally funded education system?
Let me give my response. Number one, your California example, California is virtually bankrupt. You don't, the solution is not to follow the California approach. It's gotten itself in an incredibly difficult fiscal mess. A major article in Economist, the most recent issue of Economist magazine, predicting a few cities have already gone bankrupt, but you're probably going to have a wave of municipal bankruptcies and perhaps a state bankruptcy there. With regard to your issue, you've got to figure out how to do, take existing resources that are there and make it more productively utilized. I think the cost of the existing system in terms of the high-stakes testing system and the restrictive 4x4 curriculum, that money could be better used by changing the accountability approach and returning to a much greater emphasis on local control. What you're talking about, I mean, look at 41 states, I think, have applied for a waiver from No Child Left Behind, the Bush-Kennedy bill. And that's turned out to be a bloody mess. I mean, I was up in New Hampshire last year speaking to a group about my book, and lady there, I mean, all of a sudden they've got a good educational system in the area and some new mandate coming out of Washington. I just think you've got to have limited mandates and as much as possible return, the finances. I'd like to see most of the finances from the federal government, keep a small research arm in Washington and return it to the states and local communities. Let the local school districts determine how best to spend the money within the general parameters of this multiple pathway approach. So I just think that's a reasonable approach, and we have, whether you like it or not, we got limited resources, and if we're going, and we've got to recognize you've got to make choices, and sometimes, nobody's going to be perfectly happy. What I'm encouraged by is people who have a lot of different points of view on a variety of issues are coming together on this issue, and I think we've got to stay focused on this issue, or otherwise this thing's all going to blow up, and we're going to continue to get an existing system that doesn't work. So I encourage people to put aside our differences on other issues and work together to come to a more common sense approach.
I would just add that one of the missions of this organization commit that we formed in Dallas was to really try and use the numbers to really try and help people of affluence and influence understand the severity of the issue and why they've got to get engaged. I think the biggest problem that we have facing public education in many cities around the country is apathy, and that they don't view these kids as our kids. And when we start trying to make sure that they understand that in first grade across 15 school districts in all of Dallas County, 80% of our children are either Hispanic or African American. Only 91 out of every 100 kids in K through 12 go to a public school versus a private school. It doesn't matter how good our private schools are going to be if we don't apply more resources, more funding, more involvement. Because right now we're really trying to focus on shared accountability. We can't just continue to put all the pressure and onus on the educators and not have more funding directed toward nonprofits to support this effort, not have more funding directed toward schools, not have corporates involved in reading and tutoring and all those other issues.
Go ahead.
My name is Savannah Kumar, and I'm a freshman at UT. And as a recent graduate from high school, and as someone who's cared about education for a really long time, I've noticed in my conversations with my peers and other students that I've worked with that students have really powerful insights about how they can actually learn and what they need in the system to allow them to learn. And the consensus with students, at least from my perspective, is that a punitive approach to testing actually harms their learning and actually demotivates them from actually learning, and also that they need flexibility in their curriculum in order to actually discover and explore their universe, as the speaker today mentioned. So I guess my question is, to what extent are student voices and their perspectives taken into account in discussions of education reform and high-stakes testing, and in what way can students who are the most impacted by the system have their voices heard by policymakers?
Good question. Representative John Davis had a recent hearing on some of these issues with a particular focus on career and technical education, but a lot of students, high school and college students, were there testifying. So I know Jimmie Don Aycock is a leader and has been talking with people, and I'm sure he has some comments on this, but they're welcome. I know that they've been very open to hearing from students on this issue because you're on the front lines of this issue.
I think part of what we need to do is identify, back to the Workforce Commission, some of the clusters where we need emphasis placed on particular types of courses. Sitting on the front row is a future state board member, more likely. Between the state board and the legislature and the TEA, all those things get massaged together to try to form what we call clusters. And so the student interest in who takes the courses, who expresses an interest in the course, all that becomes part of this process. And so when you get the opportunity as students, or other high school students that have an interest in particular areas, encourage them to come to hearings. A while ago, somebody asked about hearings. Nearly all public hearings, including one we got through with a few hours ago, the vast majority of them have public testimony periods. You may get just 3 minutes, but you get your chance at coming and saying your piece. And so show up, work on those clusters, especially as they relate to career stuff, because the standard stuff, the math and the history and the English, those are pretty well, we know where we're headed. But the thing that's more difficult right now is to know where student interest lies, where industry jobs occur, and that whole realm of where we're going to head with which courses and which clusters of courses.
Okay, what I'm going to do now, since we already kind of delayed our reception networking, which we have tentatively planned to go to about 9:30, and since none of you are still at the mics, one of the reasons we wanted to make sure we had plenty of audience Q&A is because your questions tell us what's important. So now we're going to be out of time to actually get answers, but I'd like those of you who've been standing by the microphones, just come up, state who you are, what your question is, so we can think about it, talk about it. You can approach panelists in the networking reception afterwards and others, but we want to hear your questions and your thoughts, and then we're going to adjourn to the reception. So I think which side was that? Over here. So just tell us your question. We're not going to get an answer, but tell us what you're thinking.
Well, I honestly, first, I got to say that I taught for 27 years here in Austin. So I don't know how much you are aware that now teachers are getting a 1-year contract versus a 3-year contract. And I feel that it's affiliated with what I call the test-taking market. The other thing is that I don't know whether you're aware that with the TAS, the gap was getting narrow, and now here comes the STAR, so the gap is going to get wider.
The hardest choice in this matter needs to be engaged, and I would have liked to have heard a little bit more about where the stakes actually need to be set, what the threshold needs to be. Thank you.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, my name is Clarissa Simmons, and I'm a public school graduate and a UT graduate, and I work here in Austin at a small publishing firm, and I just want to talk on the money issues. We're really dedicated to putting out good materials in schools, and when schools are crushed though, like the last adoption cycle, and they only had a few months to make a quick decision, they go for the easy choice. So they go for a Pearson, a Holt, McGraw. And not to say that their materials aren't good, but I think there should be a more level playing field for materials, and the teachers shouldn't be crunched for time and have to develop their own materials on their own time because they weren't given good materials in the first place. So I'd like you guys to consider some ways that teachers can see what's out there, make a Yelp for materials, make some way for teachers to see what they already have access to. Thank you.
Okay, final question.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Greco. I'm a 9-year teacher. I have a master's degree in secondary English education, and I currently work at Lehman High School in Kyle. My thought about vocational ed versus college track ed is a few things. Ultimately, no matter what my kiddos go into, I want them to have had the choice to go into whichever area they go into, the ability to think critically in either field, so they're not just a grunt or a cog in the machine either way that they go, and so that with relative ease they can transfer tracks, quote-unquote tracks if they want, so that a kiddo who's a late bloomer doesn't need to stay in one track or another, or a kiddo who is a sort of, my husband, for example, a philosophy major, but wanted to drive a truck, so drove an 18-wheel truck as a philosophy major. That's his thing. I want, I want all of our kiddos to have the ability to be critical thinkers, and to be able to choose diverse paths for themselves. If I looked at statistics and saw that in relatively proportionate numbers, white, black, and Hispanic students, and Asian students as well for that matter, and any others, were equally choosing a college path or a career path, then I'd have less qualms with this. But it seems that it is our poorer students, our minority students, who are quote-unquote choosing the vocational path, and that gives me pause because it makes me think that we didn't reach them somehow and suggested to them that they could be successful on a college track, so they choose the easier thing, and that's a concern.
So I just want to close with a couple of things. I did hear at a recent meeting that was convened at the Capitol by Commissioner Pauken, I did hear one employer talking about $80,000 a year jobs that could be had coming out of that track. So I don't think we want to make it quite so black and white. This was the start of a conversation. Obviously, we couldn't answer all your questions tonight. Some issues had to just be placed on the table. Your questions have pointed out things we did not address as much. Very limited what we can do, right? In one night, one panel, 6 people trying to represent as best as possible different positions, approaches, and places in the discussion. So I want you to encourage you to, as you know, we do have this opportunity with the 83rd legislative session coming up. I've heard this past weekend and other places there may or may not be as serious attention as we want to these issues. The only way that's going to happen is, and I think this was the message that was coming out, we need to stay together and at least ask for serious consideration of where we are today and where we could go. Just so you know, there is going to be another event Sunday, September 30th from 2 to 4 p.m. at Eastside Memorial High School Gym Auditorium in Austin. Diane Ravitch is coming to Austin. She's going to have a community conversation about education. So Sunday, September 30th, 2 to 4 p.m. Another opportunity to continue the conversation. Thank you all again for coming. You're being here. Go out to the reception, enjoy food and drink, and continue the conversation. Let's keep it going. Thank you.